Welcome back to Griffonomics, where we conduct financial investigations to define the risk before we look at the reward. Today, we're witnessing the funeral of the post-WWOI rules-based order at Davos.
It really is quite the scene. You have the global elite, gathered in Switzerland, usually to talk about cooperation and sustainability.
Building bridges.
Exactly. Instead, yesterday, they got a front row seat to, well, the dismantling of the very world they helped build.
We're talking, of course, about President Trump's address yesterday, January 21st, 2026, at the World Economic Forum. And looking at our stack of sources today, transcripts, leaked texts, analysis from trading desks, it wasn't just a speech. It felt more like a notification of eviction for the old way of doing things.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, if we look at the core philosophy Trump presented, it's a complete pivot. For decades, the United States acted as the guarantor of global stability.
Basically a public utility for the world.
A public utility, yeah. We protected trade routes. We backed currencies. Yesterday, the president made it very clear that service is no longer free.
He didn't mince words about it either. There was this moment where he looked out at that room and said, "The United States is keeping the whole world afloat. Without us, most of the countries don't even work."
And that quote right there, that's the foundation of what we're calling the Davos doctrine. It's the shift from multilateralism, where nations work together based on agreed-upon rules, to something we can really only describe as weaponized transactionalism.
Weaponized transactionalism. That sounds intense. So let's unpack that. This isn't just about, tariffs to protect American steel anymore, is it?
No, it's much more specific. It is the use of access to the American consumer market as a cudgel to force changes in the domestic policies of sovereign allies.
So it's not just buy our goods.
It's change your laws or lose access to our wallet.
It effectively weaponizes the American consumer. And we have some wild examples of this from the speech. The one that jumped out at me immediately was the Swiss watch ultimatum.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Trump is in Switzerland talking to the Swiss leadership, and he brings up a $41 billion trade deficit.
Right. It takes a certain kind of confidence to fly to a host country and tell them they are freeloading. And the reaction from the Swiss side was they protested, saying, but we are a small country. They tried to play the underdog card.
And Trump's response, he recounted it right there on stage, "You may be small, but you have a bigger deficit than big countries. Without the United States, they wouldn't be making anything."
And here's the weaponized part. He didn't just complain. He threatened a tariff of 30% to 39% on Swiss watches, and he specifically mentioned Rolexes until they agreed to pay up.
Wow. He treated a diplomatic trade imbalance like a delinquent bill collection.
That's exactly what it is. And 39% is such a specific number, it feels calculated to just absolutely crush the margin.
It's designed to be painful enough that capitulation is the only rational business choice.
Right. And that brings us to the second example, which I think is even more significant because it touches on healthcare. The story he told about France and Emmanuel Macron.
This wasn't even about trade deficits directly. It was about drug prices. And frankly, this is something that resonates with a lot of Americans.
This is a perfect case study of the new doctrine. Trump's argument is that the U.S. pays these exorbitant prices for pharmaceuticals, which effectively subsidizes global R&D, while Europe uses price controls to pay, peanuts. He demanded most favored nation pricing parity.
So basically, I want the lowest price you give anyone else. And when Macron refused...
Well, Trump detailed the phone call. He told Macron, the answer is you're going to do it. You're going to do it fast. And if you don't, I'm putting a 25% tariff on everything that you sell into the United States.
Kicker.
And a 100% tariff on your wines and champagnes.
A 100% tariff on champagne. That is an existential threat to a major French industry. You're talking about wiping out their biggest export market overnight.
And according to Trump, the efficiency of this threat was just brutal. He boasted, it took me, on average, 3 minutes a country. And every one of those countries have agreed to do it.
3 minutes to rewrite a sovereign nation's pricing policy. I mean, that is the definition of leverage. But okay, let's pivot to the elephant, or maybe the iceberg in the room, Greenland.
This was the shadow hanging over the entire summit.
Right. Leading up to this, the tension was incredibly high. There were threats of 10% tariffs on NATO allies, Denmark, Norway, the UK, if a deal for Greenland wasn't reached.
And we have to talk about why the tension was so high. We have these leaked texts from our source material between Trump and the Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre. And this gives us a glimpse into the president's mindset that you just you rarely see.
This is the juicy backstage detail, right? So the Norwegian PM texts him, trying to de-escalate, appealing to peace.
And Trump texts back saying that because he was denied the Nobel Peace Prize for stopping wars, he, and I'm quoting here, no longer feels an obligation to think purely of peace. That text is fascinating. He explicitly links his foreign policy stance to a personal grievance. He says he can now prioritize what is good and proper for the United States. It implies that peace was a constraint he's no longer bound by.
But then, during the speech itself, we got the pivot. He walked out and explicitly stated, "I won't use force." You could almost hear the collective sigh of relief in that room.
He acknowledged it, too. He said that was the biggest statement of the speech because so many people expected a military move. But he didn't back down on the desire for Greenland. He just reframed the rationale.
It wasn't about minerals or rare earths, right? He basically just dismissed that.
Correct. He called it a big, beautiful piece of ice. The real motivation is geostrategy. He laid out this vision for a golden dome, a massive missile defense shield to protect North America.
And if you look at a map, if you want to catch missiles coming from the east over the pole, you need to be in Greenland. He actually argued that geologically, Greenland is ours. He said, this enormous unsecured island is actually part of North America.
And in his view, you can't build a reliable multi-trillion-dollar defense shield on leased land. You need ownership. However, it seems the art of the deal prevailed here. He claimed on Truth Social later in the day to have reached a framework with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte.
So, disaster averted.
It seems they found a middle ground, secure access for the U.S. military without a full transfer of sovereignty. And crucially for Europe, that averted the threatened tariffs. It's classic leverage. Create a crisis, then solve it with a deal that benefits you.
Which brings us to another massive theme of this address, energy. And this links directly to the competition with China.
You absolutely cannot separate energy policy from the AI arms race. That was the clear message. Trump argues that artificial intelligence data centers require such a massive baseload of power that wind and solar, what he calls the Green New Scam, they just can't provide it.
Baseload being the key word there. You can't have your AI go offline just because the wind stopped blowing. So the solution is a hard pivot. He said, we're going heavy into nuclear.
And not just government projects. This is fascinating. He's unleashing the tech giants. He mentioned allowing companies, and he specifically name drops Mark Zuckerberg, to build their own private power grids.
That is wild. He said, I've allowed these big companies to build their own electric capacity. They're building their own power plants. So we're talking about Meta or Google essentially bypassing the national grid?
Bypassing the old grid system, as he called it. It's a deregulation play to speed up AI development. The sources from the Department of Energy outline a 9-point strategy aiming for 300 gigawatts of new nuclear capacity by 2050, including, microreactors specifically for data centers.
But we have to pause here for a fact-check moment, because the expert in you is probably twitching. Trump took a swing at wind energy, claiming China manufactures turbines but doesn't use them.
Yes, that was a notable claim. He said he hasn't seen any wind farms in China. The data in our sources paints a very different picture. China is actually the world leader in wind deployment. In 2024 alone, they accounted for 70% of new global wind capacity.
So while the U.S. pivots to nuclear for AI,
China is absolutely using wind. It's important to stick to the data there.
it is, because narratives can drift from reality. But okay, moving from global energy to what's happening on the home front. We have this funeral for the old order globally, but domestically, Trump is running what looks like a very un-Republican economic policy.
It's populist interventionism. It breaks the traditional conservative mold completely. He's using heavy government intervention to shape the market.
And the biggest example has to be housing. He announced an executive order banning large institutional investors from buying single-family homes.
This is a direct attack on Wall Street to favor the average homebuyer. His rationale is that corporations taking depreciation benefits while driving up prices is, in his words, unfair.
The quote was, "Homes are built for people, not for corporations, and America will not become a nation of renters." That sounds like something you might hear from the far left, not the right.
It's the horseshoe theory in action. And he did the same with credit cards. He called on Congress to cap credit card interest rates at 10% temporarily.
10%. I think my card is at like 29% right now. He actually used the word usury, right? Whatever have happened to usury.
A very old school concept.
Yeah.
But he frames these interventions against the backdrop of what he calls an economic miracle. And he touted numbers that, frankly, the Davos crowd couldn't ignore. 5.4% growth, 1.6% inflation, and 52 stock market records in 1 year.
It's hard to argue with the scoreboard, I guess. If the economy is booming, he has the political capital to break these rules. But speaking of breaking rules or breaking alliances, let's talk about the people in the room who weren't happy, specifically the Canadians.
This was the most public rupture we saw. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has been positioning himself as a leader of the middle powers.
Right. Carney gave a speech basically saying the old order is dead and middle-sized countries need to band together to survive because they can't rely on the superpowers anymore.
Exactly. He's calling for a survival strategy independent of the U.S. And Trump heard him.
He called them out by name in the speech. He said, "Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements."
It was such a stark reminder of the power dynamic. Trump is essentially saying, you exist under our security umbrella, so show some gratitude. And he extended that skepticism to NATO as a whole.
He questioned Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause. He said, and I quote, "I don't know that they'd be there for us."
Which is a terrifying thing for a NATO ally to hear. But Trump views it as a negotiation tactic. He claimed credit for forcing members to increase spending from 2% to 5% of GDP. In his mind, the fear of abandonment is what makes them pay up.
It's that transactionalism again. Nice alliance you have here. Shame if something happened to it. Now, before we wrap up, we have to touch on the segment we're calling Peace Through Obliteration. The Q&A session got surprisingly graphic about foreign conflicts.
It did. Trump detailed a strike on Iran that he claims wiped out their nuclear threat.
The details were specific. B-2 bombers at 2 a.m., 100,000-pound bombs, followed by submarine-launched Tomahawks.
He described it as total obliteration. And his argument is that this overwhelming display of force is what compelled a peace deal. It's the madman theory combined with actual kinetic action.
He also touched on Ukraine. He said negotiations are reasonably close, but he blamed the delay on abnormal hatred between Putin and Zelensky,
implying that it's a personality conflict that only he can manage. And he made a very bold claim that without him it would be World War II, presumably meaning World War III, but the point stands.
He sees himself as the sole barrier to global catastrophe. And briefly on Venezuela, he mentioned we're now picking up 50 million barrels of oil from them.
Yes, claiming the country is turning around economically.
Yeah.
It's another example of the transactional approach. If you have oil and you make a deal, you're back in the fold. Ideology takes a backseat to economics.
So let's bring this all together. We started by saying this was the funeral of the old order. What is the new order? What is the Davos doctrine?
The Davos doctrine is effectively the law of the jungle, but with a cover charge. The United States is signaling that its military and economic weight are no longer public goods provided to the world to maintain stability. They are bilateral weapons.
So if you want security, you pay. If you want to sell us wine, you lower your drug prices.
Precisely. We have moved from a community of nations, however flawed that concept was, to a marketplace. Security, trade, access, it's all for sale to the highest bidder or the most compliant partner.
And for the listener, why does this matter right now?
Because while this strategy might produce short-term wins like lower drug prices or tariff payments, it creates a long-term risk. We are seeing it with Canada. When you treat allies like delinquents, they don't just pay up, they start looking for new friends. They start building coalitions against your leverage.
That's the danger. You might win the negotiation, but you lose the relationship.
And in a world of rising powers like China, doing it alone, even if you are the United States, is a very high-risk gamble.
A gamble we will certainly be watching play out. That's a wrap on this investigation into the New World Order, risk defined, portfolio protected. Thanks for listening to Griffonomics.